My partner stole my company, my wife, and 9 years of my life, but he made one fatal mistake. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories about betrayal, revenge, justice, and second chances. Today's story is one of the most shocking I've ever told. Because this isn't just about a stolen business, it's about a man who lost everything. His company, his reputation, his marriage, his freedom, and then spent nearly a decade planning the comeback nobody saw coming. Most people remember the best day of their life. I remember the worst. April 14, 2016. The day federal agents walked into my headquarters and destroyed everything I had spent 30 years building. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 63 years old, and there was a time when I thought I had everything a man could want. A successful company, a beautiful home, a loving family, and a business partner I trusted like a brother. That last one turned out to be my biggest mistake. At the time, I owned Mercer Logistics Group, a transportation company that operated across 7 states. What started as one delivery truck and a rented warehouse had grown into a business worth nearly $40 million. I wasn't born wealthy, far from it. My father was a mechanic. My mother worked night shifts at a hospital. Everything I owned came from long days, sleepless nights, and years of sacrifice. I was proud of that, maybe too proud. Because success has a way of making you believe you've figured people out. You start thinking you're too smart to be fooled, too experienced to be manipulated, too careful to be betrayed. I believed all three. I was wrong. The morning everything collapsed started normally. Coffee, emails, meetings, nothing unusual. Then my assistant rushed into my office. Her face was pale. Danny. Nobody called me Danny at work unless something was wrong. What happened? There are federal agents downstairs. I laughed at first. I actually laughed, because I assumed they were there about one of our clients. Maybe a regulatory issue. Maybe a shipping dispute. Nothing serious. Then I saw their faces. 3 agents. 2 IRS investigators. And a woman carrying a thick stack of documents. Nobody looked friendly. Nobody looked confused, and nobody looked like they were there by mistake. The lead investigator introduced himself. Then he placed a file on the conference table. I still remember the sound it made. A simple sound, paper against wood. Funny how small sounds can change your life. Mr. Mercer, he said, we need to discuss several financial transactions. I frowned. What transactions? He opened the file. And suddenly, I was staring at documents I'd never seen before. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, fake vendor payments, fraudulent invoices, millions of dollars moving through companies I had never heard of. At first, I thought there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Then I saw my signature, or at least what looked like my signature. Again, and again, and again, authorization forms, transfer approvals, tax records. Everything pointed directly at me. I looked around the room, confused, angry, terrified. Then my eyes landed on someone standing near the wall. My accountant, Robert Hayes, a man who had worked for me for 11 years, a man I trusted completely. The investigator turned toward him. Mr. Hayes, can you confirm who authorized these transactions? Robert didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. He pointed at me and said, Daniel did. The room spun. I actually thought I was going to fall over. That's a lie. Nobody responded. I looked at Robert, then at the investigators, then back at Robert. Tell them the truth. He couldn't even meet my eyes. That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. Not just an audit. Not just an investigation. A setup. A very expensive setup. And somehow, I was standing at the center of it. The criminal case moved faster than I thought possible. Within weeks, newspapers were calling me a fraud. Television stations were reporting on corporate corruption. People I'd known for years suddenly stopped answering my calls. Some didn't even pretend anymore. They vanished. My attorneys fought hard, but every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Me. Every account, Every document, every signature, every transaction. Someone had built a perfect case, and I was living inside it. The trial lasted for months. The verdict took less than 6 hours. Guilty. I can still hear the foreman saying it, still hear the silence that followed, still remember looking toward the gallery. My wife, Sandra, was crying. My daughter, Emily, looked frozen, and my business partner, Victor Kane, the man who had helped build the company with me, the man I trusted more than anyone outside my family, he looked sad. At least that's what everyone else saw. I saw something different. Relief. For just a second. A tiny flash dot, then it disappeared. But I saw it, and once I saw it, I couldn't forget it. The judge sentenced me to 11 years. I was 54 years old. In that moment, 11 years felt like forever. Prison changes people. Anyone who tells you otherwise has never been there. The first year was the hardest. Not because of the prison itself, because of what happened outside. Sandra visited twice. The first visit, she cried. The second visit, she cried even harder. Both times, she promised she believed in me. Promised she would wait. Promised she would fight for me. 14 months later, divorce papers arrived. No phone call, no visit, no explanation, just signatures. And a short letter, 3 paragraphs. The final sentence said, "I need to move forward with my life." I read that sentence at least 50 times. Every word hurt. But what hurt even more came later. Much later, when I learned who she moved forward with. Victor, my partner, my best friend. The man who sat beside me in court pretending to support me. The man now living in my house, sleeping in my bed, driving my car, running my company. That knowledge did something to me. Not anger, not immediately, something colder, something quieter, purpose. The worst loss wasn't my marriage, it was my daughter. Emily had been 28 when I went to prison. Bright, successful, engaged to a good man, she had a future. Then my conviction happened, and suddenly she became the fraudster's daughter. Her employer let her go. Her engagement ended. Her entire life collapsed because of something I didn't do. Every letter she sent me tried to sound positive, but I could read between the lines. Parents always can. She was struggling, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. That helplessness nearly broke me. Nearly, but not completely. Because one night, lying on a prison bunk staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. If I ever got out, I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life feeling sorry for myself. I was going to find out exactly what happened, who did it, how they did it, and why. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, no matter who was involved, I would uncover the truth, even if I had to do it alone. And that promise became the only thing that kept me going. Day after day, year after year, for 9 long years. 9 years later, I walked out of prison with $52 in my pocket, an old watch on my wrist, and a name written on a folded piece of paper. The name belonged to a retired detective, the first person who would help me discover the truth, and what he showed me next proved my life had been stolen long before I was arrested. 9 years. That's how long I spent staring at concrete walls, replaying the same questions over and over in my head. Who set me up? How did they do it, and why? The day I walked out of prison, I didn't feel free. I felt unfinished. Most men leave prison looking for a fresh start. I left looking for answers. The world had changed while I was gone. Businesses had disappeared. Technology had evolved. Entire neighborhoods looked different. But one thing hadn't changed. The feeling in my gut that I'd been betrayed by someone close to me, very close in my pocket, was a folded piece of paper. A name, Thomas Reed, a retired detective. 3 years before my release, another inmate had introduced me to his brother through letters. That brother happened to be Red. For months, we'd exchanged messages. Nothing dramatic. Just conversations, questions, observations. The kind of things investigators notice that ordinary people miss. And after reviewing portions of my case, Reed had written something that stayed with me. The strongest lies are built around pieces of truth. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I would soon. 2 days after my release, I met him. Thomas Reed lived in a small town nearly 2 hours outside the city. His house was modest. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. When he opened the door, he looked exactly how I'd imagined. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that looked calm until you realized he was studying everything around him, including me. "You look older than your prison photo." I laughed. "Thanks. You look older than your driver's license." For the first time in years, I genuinely smiled. Maybe that's why I trusted him. We spent nearly 4 hours reviewing my case. Every document, every witness statement, every financial report. Reed barely spoke. He simply read, page after page, making notes, highlighting details, occasionally shaking his head. Finally, he closed the last folder. "Your problem wasn't the evidence." I frowned. "What do you mean? The evidence was overwhelming." I sighed. "Tell me something I don't know." He leaned back. "The problem is that it was too perfect." That got my attention.
"What?"
He pointed toward the stack of documents. "In 30 years of investigations, I've never seen fraud this clean." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means real criminals make mistakes." He tapped the folder. "These people didn't." The statement sent a chill through me, because he was right. Every transaction, every account, every signature, everything fit together perfectly, too perfectly. Almost like someone had designed it. Reed stood up and walked toward a whiteboard hanging on the wall. Then he wrote 3 names, Daniel Mercer and Victor Kane. Robert Hayes. I stared at them, myself, my partner, my accountant. Reed circled Victor's name. "Tell me about him." I hadn't spoken Victor's name out loud in years. Ambitious, intelligent, good with people, anything else. I hesitated. He hated being second. Reed stopped writing, then slowly turned around. "Explain." I sighed. There wasn't a single meeting where Victor didn't try to prove himself. To clients, to investors, to employees. He always wanted recognition. The detective nodded. "And who got most of it?" I already knew the answer. I did. The room became quiet. Then Reed asked the question I should have asked myself years ago. What happens when a man spends 20 years helping build an empire he can never fully control? For several seconds I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. Resentment, jealousy, greed. The same things that destroy friendships every day. Only this time, millions of dollars were involved. Reed sat back down. "Now tell me about your wife." That question hit harder than expected. I told him everything. The visits, the divorce, the marriage to Victor, the timing, all of it. When I finished, Reed remained silent. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Your wife wasn't the prize." "What? She was the confirmation?" I frowned. "I don't understand." "The moment she married Victor, she validated him." Reed leaned forward. "Think about it. He got your company. He got your house. He got your reputation. And then he got your wife." The detective's eyes narrowed. "That's not love, Daniel. It's conquest." The word hit me like a punch, because suddenly, everything looked different. Not like a business crime. Like a takeover. A complete takeover. And for the first time since my conviction, I began wondering whether Victor's goal had never been money alone. Maybe he wanted my entire life. As the afternoon ended, Reed handed me a thin folder. Inside was a photograph. I stared at it, then looked up, confused. "Who is this?" The detective's expression turned serious. "That's the man who can prove you were framed." My pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Reed pointed to the picture. 3 months before your arrest, this man met privately with Victor Kane and Robert Hayes. I felt my heart start pounding. "Who is he?" Reed took a deep breath, then answered. "A former forensic auditor." I stared at the photo. Because for the first time in 9 years, I wasn't chasing a theory anymore. I had a lead. And if Reed was right, everything was about to change. The next morning, I tracked down the former auditor. What he told me in the first 60 seconds changed the entire case. Because according to him, the fraud wasn't created to steal money. It was created to steal me. The next morning, I barely slept. For 9 years, I'd lived with questions. Now I finally had a lead. A real lead, not a rumor, not a theory. A person, a man who might know what actually happened before my arrest. I left my motel before sunrise and drove nearly 3 hours to a small coastal town where the former forensic auditor lived. His name was Elliot Graves. According to Thomas Reed, Graves had spent most of his career investigating corporate fraud. He'd testified in dozens of cases, exposed corrupt executives, recovered millions in stolen assets. And then, almost suddenly, he'd disappeared from the industry. Nobody seemed to know why. That alone made me curious. By 10 in the morning, I was standing outside a modest house overlooking the water. Nothing about it screamed wealth, or power, or scandal. Just a quiet place where a man could disappear from the world. I knocked, no answer. I knocked again, still nothing. Just as I was about to leave, the door opened. A thin man in his late 60s stared at me. The moment he saw my face, something changed in his expression. Recognition, not from meeting me, from knowing exactly who I was. Daniel Mercer. It wasn't a question, I nodded. You know me, he laughed bitterly. Unfortunately, that wasn't the greeting I'd expected. He stepped aside. You'd better come in. The inside of the house looked more like an archive than a home. Boxes, folders, documents. Thousands of pages stacked everywhere. The kind of place built by someone who never throws anything away. Graves motioned toward a chair, then sat across from me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the obvious question. Did you meet Victor Kane? His jaw tightened. Yes. And Robert Hayes? Another nod. When? 3 months before your arrest. Exactly what Reed had said. My heart started pounding. I leaned forward. What happened? Graves stared out the window for several seconds, like he was deciding how much to tell me. Then he sighed. Victor hired me. I blinked. What? He claimed he suspected financial irregularities inside your company. I frowned. Inside my company? Yes. He said he wanted a private review before involving authorities. That sounded exactly like Victor. Always appearing responsible, always appearing concerned, always appearing loyal. The perfect mask, Graves continued. At first, everything seemed normal. But after 2 weeks, I noticed something strange. I sat forward. What? The evidence kept appearing too silly. A chill ran through me. The same thing Reed had said. Too perfect, too clean. Too convenient. Graves nodded. I've spent my entire life investigating fraud, and real fraud is messy. There are gaps, missing records, conflicting statements, mistakes. But this, he shook his head. This looked manufactured. The room suddenly felt smaller. Manufactured. Like someone built it. I felt my pulse racing, because that was exactly what I'd suspected all these years. Not fraud, a setup. A carefully engineered setup. What did you do? I asked. Graves laughed without humor. I asked questions. That answer told me everything. People who ask dangerous questions often get dangerous answers. What kind of questions? The kind Victor didn't like. He stood up and walked toward a filing cabinet. After searching for a moment, he pulled out an old folder, then placed it on the table. I stared at it. My name was written across the front. Daniel Mercer. 9 years. 9 years, and this man still had a file with my name on it. Open it. My hands felt strangely heavy as I flipped through the pages. Internal memos, financial reviews, audit notes. Then I stopped. A document marked Preliminary Findings. I looked up. What is this? Graves sat back down. My original report. I scanned the first page. Then the second. Then the third. My heart nearly stopped. Because according to the report, there wasn't enough evidence to accuse me of anything. In fact, several transactions pointed toward other individuals, including Robert Hayes and Victor Kane. I looked up in disbelief. Why wasn't this used at trial? Graves smiled bitterly. Because it disappeared. What? The day after I submitted it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It vanished. He nodded. Along with my contract, my access, my involvement. The room went silent. Finally, I asked the question burning in my mind. What happened to you? His expression hardened. I was paid. That surprised me. Paid. A very large amount of money. I frowned, to stay quiet. He nodded slowly. At first, my stomach tightened. At first, Graves looked directly into my eyes. Then came the threats. The next 20 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about my case. According to Graves, Victor hadn't merely wanted control of the company. He wanted complete ownership. Without opposition. Without competition. Without me. The fraud wasn't designed to steal money. The money was secondary. The real objective was simpler. Remove Daniel Mercer. Take everything else afterward. The company. The assets, the influence, the reputation, even the family, piece by piece. One calculated move at a time. By the time Graves finished speaking, I felt physically sick. Not because of the lies, because of the patience involved. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a plan, a long-term plan, years in the making. Then Graves said something that made my blood run cold. There's one more thing. I looked up. What? His face became serious. The person who helped create the financial trail wasn't Victor. I froze. What are you talking about? He wasn't smart enough. The statement shocked me, because Victor was smart. Very smart. Yet Graves sounded certain. Then who? For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he reached into the folder, pulled out an old photograph, and slid it across the table. I picked it up. The moment I saw the face, my stomach dropped. Because I knew exactly who it was. And if Graves was right, the betrayal was even bigger than I'd imagined, much bigger. The photograph revealed someone I trusted completely. Someone who stood beside me for nearly 20 years. Someone I never once suspected. And according to Elliot Graves, they were the real architect behind my downfall. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the photograph lying on the table. The face looking back at me wasn't Victor Kane, it wasn't Robert Hayes, and it definitely wasn't someone I expected. It was Martin Cross, my former chief financial officer, my CFO, a man who had worked beside me for 19 years, a man who attended my daughter's graduation, a man who spent holidays at my house, a man I trusted so completely that I once gave him authority to sign documents on my behalf when I was traveling overseas. I slowly looked up at Elliot Graves. No, his expression didn't change. I'm afraid so. I shook my head. No, that's impossible. Why? The question caught me off guard, because Martin was loyal. Graves folded his arms. How do you know? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because suddenly, I realized something. I didn't know. I had assumed. For nearly 2 decades, I'd assumed. And assumptions had cost me 9 years of my life. Tell me everything, I said. Graves nodded. Then he opened another folder. Inside were dozens of documents, emails, meeting notes, financial authorizations, internal memos. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. Then Graves pointed to several signatures. Look closely. I studied them. My signature, or what appeared to be my signature. Again, and again. And again, what about them? Those signatures weren't forged. I frowned. What? They were authorized. My stomach tightened. I don't understand. Graves leaned forward. Years before your arrest, you granted Martin limited signing authority during business travel. Suddenly, I remembered. A routine legal authorization. Something we'd used for emergencies. Nothing unusual. Thousands of companies had similar arrangements. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now, it looked catastrophic. Graves continued. Most of the documents used against you were created using authority that already existed. I stared at him. They used my own permissions. Exactly. For a moment, I felt sick, because it was brilliant, not morally, not legally, but strategically, Instead of forging documents, they used real authority. Instead of creating obvious fraud, they buried it inside legitimate procedures. No wonder investigators believed it. No wonder jurors believed it. No wonder everyone believed it. The trap wasn't built on fake evidence. It was built on real evidence, used dishonestly. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, waves crashed against the shoreline. For years, I had imagined some complicated conspiracy. Some criminal mastermind, something dramatic. Instead, the answer was simpler. People I trusted had weaponized that trust. Nothing more, nothing less. Why? I finally asked. Graves sighed. Money. I shook my head. No. What do you mean? Money, explains Victor. I turned toward him. It explains Robert, but Martin. I remembered birthdays, family dinners, late-night meetings, years of friendship. Why would he do it? Graves didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another file. Then slid a bank statement across the table. I looked down. The number nearly made me fall into my chair. $8.7 million. Transferred over a 3-year period. My eyes widened. What is this? Martin's offshore account. The room became silent. $8.7 million. More money than Martin could have earned in decades. More money than anyone could reasonably explain. I stared at the statement, then another dot, then another dot. The payments continued, year after year. Carefully hidden, carefully structured, carefully disguised, and every transfer traced back to entities connected to Victor Kane. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Eventually, I asked the question that terrified me most. Who else knew? Graves looked uncomfortable. That wasn't a good sign. How many people were involved? He hesitated, then answered, more than you think. A chill ran through me. How many? At least 5. I felt my stomach drop. 5 people. 5 people who watched my life collapse. 5 people who stayed silent. 5 people who helped send an innocent man to prison. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because of the number. Because of what it meant. Every major betrayal in my life had happened at the hands of people I trusted. Not strangers, not criminals, people sitting around conference tables, people shaking my hand, people smiling in family photographs. Then Graves revealed something even worse. There was a meeting. I froze. What meeting? The final planning meeting. The words sounded unreal, like something from a movie. Not my life. My life wasn't supposed to have planning meetings for destroying me, yet here we were. When 6 weeks before your arrest, who attended? Graves looked directly at me. Victor, Robert Martin. He paused, then added 2 more names, and the second name nearly stopped my heart, because it belonged to someone I loved. Someone I never suspected. Someone whose betrayal would hurt more than all the others combined. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to think, unable to process what I had just heard. That's not possible. Graves looked away. I wish it wasn't. The drive back to my motel felt endless. The entire time I replayed that name over and over in my head, hoping I misunderstood, hoping Graves was mistaken, hoping there was some explanation, any explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't, because suddenly dozens of memories looked different. Conversations, arguments, decisions, small moments I'd ignored for years, moments that now felt significant. The pieces were finally starting to fit together, and I hated the picture they were creating. By the time I reached my room, it was nearly midnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Then my phone rang. Thomas Reed. I answered immediately. What happened? You were right. A pause. Then Reed said something that sent another shock through me. I ran a background check on Martin, and Daniel. His voice became serious. Martin isn't running from the investigation. I frowned. What do you mean? The detective took a deep breath, then delivered the worst possible news. He's already dead. Martin Cross died 8 months after my conviction. Officially, it was ruled a heart attack. But the records Thomas Reed uncovered told a very different story. And if those records were true, Someone had been eliminating loose ends from the very beginning. For a long time, I simply stared at my phone. Martin Cross was dead. The man who might have explained everything. The man who helped build the financial trail that destroyed my life. Gone. 8 months after my conviction. At first glance, it sounded like bad luck, a heart attack, a tragic coincidence, a stressed executive under pressure. But after everything I'd learned, I no longer believed in coincidences. Not where Victor Kane was concerned. "Tell me everything," I said. Thomas Reed sighed. "I've been digging through old records all day, and the official report says natural causes." I closed my eyes. Officially, yes. That single word told me there was more, much more. "What did you find?" Reed paused, then said, "Martin changed his will 3 weeks before he died." I frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything." The next morning, I met Reed at a small cafe. The place was nearly empty. Perfect for a conversation nobody else needed to hear. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of probate records, financial statements, and legal filings. At first, none of it made sense. Then Reed pointed to a specific page. "Look here." I read the document, then read it again. My pulse quickened. Martin had left almost his entire estate to a trust, not to his family, not to his children. A trust. What am I looking at? Reed leaned forward. The trustee. I looked at the name and froze. Victor Kane. I felt my stomach drop. You're kidding. I wish I was Martin's estate. His money, his investments, all under Victor's control. Even after death, the arrangement made no sense. Unless Martin no longer trusted someone. Or someone wanted to make sure certain secrets stayed buried. As I continued reviewing the documents, another detail stood out. Several withdrawals had occurred during the months leading up to Martin's death. Large withdrawals, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet there was no clear explanation for where the money went. No properties purchased, no businesses acquired, no luxury spending. The money simply vanished. Almost as if someone was moving assets before a storm. "Do you think Martin knew something?" I asked. Reed nodded immediately. "Absolutely." The certainty in his voice surprised me. "How can you be sure?" He pointed toward the financial records. "Because people don't suddenly reorganize their entire estate unless they're afraid." The word lingered in my mind. Afraid. Of what? Or more importantly, of whom? That afternoon, we visited Martin's widow. Her name was Rebecca. She looked exhausted, not physically. Emotionally, like someone who had spent years carrying a burden she couldn't share. At first, she refused to talk. The moment I introduced myself, I saw recognition in her eyes. She knew exactly who I was. And judging by her reaction, she'd been expecting this conversation for a long time. Finally, she invited us inside the house, felt frozen in time, photographs, awards, family memories. Pieces of a life that no longer existed. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Rebecca spoke. Martin wanted to tell the truth. The room went silent. Reed and I exchanged a glance. "What do you mean?" I asked. Tears filled her eyes. The last year of his life, he barely slept. She looked down at her hands. He kept saying he'd made a terrible mistake. My chest tightened. What mistake? Rebecca shook her head. He never told me everything. But I knew he was scared. Scared of who? Her answer came immediately. Victor. The room became so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. For years, Victor Kane had appeared untouchable, successful, respected, admired, the grieving partner who helped rebuild the company after my conviction. At least that was the public story, but privately, a very different picture was emerging. Rebecca stood and walked toward a cabinet. After searching for a moment, she returned, holding a small envelope. "I think Martin wanted someone to find this." She handed it to me. The paper felt old, worn, almost forgotten. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else, no letter, no explanation, just a flash drive. I looked up. "Have you seen what's on it?" Rebecca shook her head, No, why not? Because Martin told me never to open it. I stared at the device. For the first time in 9 years, I felt like I was standing inches away from the truth. Maybe closer. That evening, Reed and I sat in his office. The flash drive rested on the desk between us. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, Reed inserted it into his computer. The screen loaded. Several folders appeared. Financial records. Emails. Internal communications. Hundreds of files. Then we found a folder labeled Insurance. I frowned. Insurance. Reed clicked it. The folder opened. Inside were recordings. Dozens of recordings, secret recordings, conversations, meetings, phone calls. The kind of evidence people collect when they know they're in danger. The kind of evidence people collect when they fear they won't live long enough to tell the truth themselves. My pulse raced. We clicked the first file. The audio crackled. Then a voice filled the room. A voice I recognized immediately. Victor Kane. And the words that came next changed everything. Because for the first time, I heard him admit it, not directly, not fully, but enough, far more than enough to destroy the story he'd spent nearly a decade protecting. Enough to expose the entire conspiracy. Enough to finally prove I wasn't the villain. I was the victim. The recording revealed a secret meeting that took place just weeks before my arrest. And hidden within that conversation was one sentence that could bring down everyone involved. The sentence began with, "Once Daniel is gone." And what came next shocked even Thomas Reed. The room was completely silent. Thomas Reed and I sat staring at the computer screen as the recording played. For 9 years, I'd imagined what the truth might sound like. I thought it would be dramatic, explosive, undeniable. Instead, it sounded casual, like a business meeting. Which somehow made it worse. Because the people discussing my destruction weren't angry. They weren't emotional. They weren't acting like criminals. They sounded like executives discussing quarterly profits. Then Victor's voice came through the speakers. Clear as day. Once Daniel is gone, everything becomes easier. My chest tightened. The recording continued. Another voice spoke. Martin Cross. What if investigators start asking questions? Victor laughed. Actually laughed. They'll be asking Daniel. The room went cold. 9 years. 9 years of wondering. 9 years of doubt. And now I was hearing the truth directly from the people responsible. Not speculation, not theories, evidence, real evidence. The recording lasted nearly 40 minutes. By the time it ended, Reed looked as stunned as I felt. Victor never explicitly said, "Let's frame Daniel." He didn't need to. The meaning was obvious. The discussion revolved around removing me from the company, transferring control, managing public perception, protecting assets, and making sure I took the blame. At one point, Victor even said something that made my stomach turn. People believe what they expect to believe. That sentence explained everything that the investigators expected to find: corporate fraud. The media expected to find a greedy executive. The public expected to find corruption. Victor simply gave them a story they were ready to accept. And I became the villain. But the most important evidence wasn't in that recording. It came from the final file on the flash drive. A file Martin had created only weeks before his death. The file name was simple. "Read this if something happens to me." I opened it, and suddenly Martin Cross was speaking to me from beyond the grave. The letter was 8 pages long. I read every word, then read it again, and again, because I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Martin admitted everything. Everything. How Victor approached him years earlier. How Robert Hayes helped manipulate records. How shell companies were created. How transactions were designed to point toward me. How documents disappeared before trial. How witnesses were pressured. How money changed hands. Every detail, every lie, every betrayal, written in Martin's own words. But one paragraph stood out above all others. Daniel never knew what was happening. He trusted us completely. That trust made the plan possible. I stopped reading. For a moment, I couldn't continue. Because that sentence hurt more than any prison sentence ever had. Not because it exposed the conspiracy, because it exposed me, my weakness, my mistake. I trusted the wrong people, and they used that trust as a weapon. The following weeks moved quickly. Very quickly. Reed delivered copies of the evidence to federal authorities. The recordings were authenticated. The documents were verified. The financial records matched Martin's statements. Piece by piece, the case that destroyed my life began to collapse. Investigators reopened my conviction. Prosecutors reviewed evidence. Reporters started asking questions. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Victor Kane looked nervous. Publicly, he denied everything. Of course he did. Privately, however, a different story was unfolding. Several former employees began cooperating. Former executives started talking. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly found their courage. Funny how quickly loyalty disappears when evidence appears. 6 months later, I sat inside a courtroom once again. The same courthouse, the same city. The same system that had once sent me away. Only this time, things were different. Very different. The judge reviewed the new evidence. The recordings, the statements, the financial trails, the concealed agreements, the testimony, everything. Then came the moment I'd waited nearly 10 years to hear. The judge looked directly at me, and said, "Mr. Mercer, this court vacates your conviction." For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then the reality finally hit me. I was innocent, legally, officially, publicly. The truth had finally caught up with the lie. And the lie lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones appeared from every direction. Questions flew through the air. How did it feel? What would I do next? Did I want revenge? I paused before answering. Because for years, I thought revenge was what I wanted. But standing there, I realized something. Revenge wasn't the goal anymore. The truth was, and I'd finally found it. So I simply said, the truth doesn't always move quickly, but eventually it arrives. Victor Kane's downfall came less than a year later. Fraud. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Multiple charges. The empire he stole collapsed faster than anyone expected. Investors disappeared. Business partners vanished. Friends stopped calling. The same thing that happened to me. Only this time, it was deserved. The company he fought so hard to take eventually entered bankruptcy proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially me. The greatest moment didn't happen in a courtroom or during a press conference. It happened quietly. One Sunday afternoon, my daughter Emily invited me to her house, a small house, nothing extravagant, just a home filled with warmth, family, life. Things I thought I'd lost forever. After dinner, she handed me a framed photograph. I looked down. It was an old picture, taken years before my arrest. The two of us standing outside the first warehouse I ever owned. Back when everything was still possible. On the frame she had engraved 6 simple words. He never stopped coming home. I couldn't speak. For all those years I thought I'd lost everything. My company, my reputation, my future. But I hadn't lost the one thing that mattered most, my family. Not completely. And that realization meant more than any courtroom victory ever could. Today, at 63 years old, my life looks very different than it once did. I never rebuilt the $40 million company. I never bought back the mansion. I never recovered the years that were stolen. Some things can't be returned, but I gained something unexpected, peace. The kind that only comes when questions finally have answers. When lies finally have consequences, and when truth finally wins. If there's one lesson in my story, it's this. Never assume betrayal comes from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people sitting closest to you. The people you trust most. The people who know exactly where your blind spots are. Trust is important. But trust without verification can be dangerous. I learned that lesson the hard way. 9 years too late. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of betrayal, revenge, justice, and redemption. And tell me in the comments, at what point did you realize Victor Kane was behind everything? Remember, a lie can travel around the world, but the truth eventually catches up. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and never ignore your instincts.